In our main segment this week here on Mastering Dungeons, we are here with Mike Sly Flourish Shea to talk about his career in the RPG industry, as well as his new book, which is kickstarting right now, Rise of the Lazy Game Master. So, Mike, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you. Great pleasure to be
And
here.
we're a tip of the hat to Teos. I hope you're enjoying your little vacation while we're here sweating over hot microphones. But it's such is life. Yep. So, Mike, for those of you, I mean, we have a huge crossover, I think, between our audience
Yeah,
and
sure.
yours.
Yeah,
But just on the off chance people don't know about you and your work in the industry, could
sure.
you give us a quick rundown about sort of what you've done in the industry over the years?
Yeah, sure. So I got started playing RPGs when I was about 13 or 14 years old in the mid late 80s. Played on and off throughout high school and college, and then got started back in regularly after meeting my wife, who we weren't married yet, but we were together and played in a game about 25 years ago. Yeah, it was a 2002 2003 time period thereabout, maybe not that far back, 23 years ago or so, and I've been playing weekly kind of ever since. And we played kind of in I would say the tail end of third edition, like in mid to tail end of third edition of D&D. Mostly just enjoying playing. I wasn't involved in any kind of design work other than the kind of design work that all of us did in third edition, which was like, hey, I'm going to make a boss. That's going to take me all day Saturday, right? Because I got to recalculate every single stat for every single guy. And then they die in a round and a half anyway. And then fourth edition D&D came out, and I got really excited for fourth edition of D&D because I saw them streamlining a lot of stuff that was kind of inherent in third edition, but not the design for it wasn't hardened. I really liked, like, hey, you can move diagonally without having to do trigonometry. You can, lots of little features where they made a choice. It was an opinionated RPG of this is on a grid, right? This is a gridded based game, squares instead of feet. And we're going to expect that you're going to be using maps and miniatures and everything like that. And I had the advantage, Winter Fantasy, which you and I have been to many, many times, was in DC, where I live. I live in the DC area, and so I went there when they were doing the so I was at Gen Con when they announced fourth edition, and I was at Winter Fantasy when they tested fourth edition, and I had a fun interaction with Rob Hainsou, the lead designer of fourth edition D&D, and now the lead designer for 13th Age and everything else, who became a mentor of mine in the design space for some time. And where I said, like, I kind of I was in a line for something, and I grabbed him on the way, and I said, I have a question for you. And he's like, what? And I said, are you still going to have to confirm critical hits? And he looks at me, he's like, do you like confirming critical hits? And I said, no. And he goes, we're not going to have confirmation of critical hits.
It was like, nice of him to get that answer first.
Right. But I don't think he was asking. It was more of I know we don't like, like, why would you think we would put that in there? Right. So the design for that was done. But it was the first time that I think I had an iPhone then, or I had a camera phone. And there wasn't any restriction on taking pictures because nobody took pictures with their phone and put it online before. So I was like, I'm going to take pictures of all these cool fourth edition playtest character sheets and stuff. And I had a Tumblr blog, and I posted it to the Tumblr blog, and it went the equivalent of viral if viral was back in whatever that was, 2008. Right. And a bunch of people on a bunch of different forums were like, hey, look, here's what fourth edition D&D looks like. Nobody had seen it before. And here's what the character sheets look like. And it was the only way online that you could actually see what fourth edition really looked like when you looked at character sheets. So that I was like, I should start like a blog about this. I could take my little Tumblr blog and turn it into something a little bit more. And I had been blogging for a long time on other things. So I had a personal blog since 1990, whatever. And since there was a web pretty much. And I had also done a lot of sort of fan work with EverQuest, the massive online game EverQuest. And I wrote a blog for that. I wrote a lot of fan fiction for that. I ended up working for a blog that talked all about it when the lead guy who wrote the blog, called Mob Hunter, ended up getting a job at Sony to work on EverQuest 2. He said, I can't write for the blog anymore, but you have written guest articles here a ton, so why don't you just take it over? So I did, and I wrote a bunch of blog articles there. And then Sony flew me out to their headquarters to go talk to them about EverQuest and a bunch of these summits that they had. So I was kind of familiar with working with companies on this kind of stuff. But then I got away from video game and massive online gaming and got back into D&D again. And I was like, so I want to write a D&D blog, but I want to write a D&D blog that's focused on game masters and focused on game masters that are running 4th edition D&D. So I gave it a 4th edition D&D name of Sly Flourish, which is a rogue power that 4th edition rogues had. And I started writing about 4th edition D&D back then. I don't remember when. I guess that would be 2008-ish. And started to write a bunch of stuff there. And kind of the same way that happened with EverQuest, I got to the point where they just couldn't ignore me anymore. And I think I got him. I want to say it was Greg Bilson, but it might have been somebody else. But somebody sent me an email that was almost the equivalent of, well, fine, I guess we have to have you write something for us now. Right? It wasn't even like, you clearly won't shut up and go away. I'm making this up. I don't think this didn't really come in this way, but it was almost like you're clearly not going away. So why don't you come and do some stuff for us? So I actually got an opportunity to design monsters and adventures and some other things for 4th edition D&D. I did a couple of Lair Assaults that they had, if you remember Lair Assaults. Sure. I wrote a bunch of different monster segments for a bunch of the Dungeon and Dragon magazines that were at the time. The one thing that I'm kind of most proud of is I think I have the most powerful single 4th edition monster that was ever published by Wizards of the Coast, which was Cryonax, and he's the elemental prince that's tied to your ice elemental kind of, right? Because he was the one oddball of the 4 elemental princes. He's the 5th of ice. And like, why isn't there 3 other elemental, quasi-elemental, but whatever. Cryonax was it. And he was a weird dude, right? He had a big, he was sort of Demogorgon-like. He had big tentacle arms and he had a baboon head. And I was like, if he had 2 baboon heads, he'd be Demogorgon, but whatever, right? So I wrote and designed that. And I was very proud of it because I came up with a concept like the donut aura. And the donut aura is essentially like a normal aura that will totally wreck your world if you are between a range and another range of the monster, which forced people to stay near the monster so he could hit them, right? And that was because you had to do stuff like that in 4th edition to have any threat at all. So I did a lot of that. Then my friends Teos who we know, and Scott Fitzgerald Gray, who we also know, were all brought together by Greg Bilsland to work on a project called Vault of the Dracolich. And it was one of their experiments where they said, instead of having a designer, a developer, and an editor work in separate segments, we're going to have all of you work together on the whole thing at once. And so we got together and met and all fell in love with one another. And we loved working on the project together. And, we've been working together ever since. It was really the time where we really got to do that. We loved it, very much. And that was right between 4th and 5th edition. Like that Vault of the Dracolich has 5th edition. I think it's like 3rd, 4th, and 5th. It was one of these weird transition products that had multiple versions of it. And it was also like, and I'm sure have received instructions like this. It's got to be 3rd level or whatever. I don't remember exactly the level, 3rd or 5th level. And they have to fight a Dracolich. And you're like, how is this supposed to work? Right? Like,
let me do the math there.
Yeah, I don't think that's supposed to. But we came up with something, and it was a big multi-table event, and we enjoyed that a lot. And the map for that, I had another privilege I designed the map for that, and then showed it to Greg Bilson, who said that map is not how we design maps anymore. And I said, all right, let me go back and do it again. And I did it again. And then Scott wrote up a cleaner version of it, and that map ended up being one of the default maps in the 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide. Oh, nice. So I could look at the map that was in there and be like, hey, I worked on the design of that map that was in that book. So that made me really happy. Cool. Ever since, I continued with the blog. And right as 4th edition and 5th edition were ending, I wrote a book called The Lazy Dungeon Master, which was based in this idea that like a lot of us were spending so much time on prep, and particularly 4th edition had a lot of prep time because you built those encounters, and the encounters had to be very, they're very structured elements with lots of different pieces that you had to pay attention to. And a lot of GMs were getting burned out on that. And a lot of other experienced GMs were like, I prep hardly anything at all. And I'm running really fun games. And so I, did a bunch of research, talked to a lot of GMs, did a bunch of surveys, got this stuff together, and came up with this process that I put into a small book called The Lazy Dungeon Master. Then we were kind of deep into 5th edition at that point. And I went back and looked, and I'm like, man, I don't even use the steps that I had outlined in that book. I think I need to write another book. But I was really worried about crushing the old book with a new book.
Right.
And I said, I don't know if I should do this or not. And I said, I really need to, because I don't follow my own stuff in this book. let me make a new one. And I wrote Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, which was a big success, big hit. Sold many more copies than the original Lazy Dungeon Master did. So much so that most people don't know there was an old one. They only know Return. And sometimes people will call it the Lazy Dungeon Master, and you're like, actually, that's the second one, right? The first one was called Lazy Dungeon Master. So that came out. Then I did a bunch of other books. I continued to freelance. I didn't do any freelance work for Wizards, but I did a lot of other freelance work for many other companies. Pelgrane Press for 13th Age, I did a lot of stuff for them. Kobold Press did a bunch of stuff for them. MCDM later on with Flea Mortals, worked on that, and a bunch of other things. And also continue to write my own books. So since then, I think I've written about 10 books on various things, a bunch of adventure books. Campaign book last couple of years ago called City of Arches. And then came back again and said, well, now we've had 8 years of more experiences having used Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master. What have we learned since then? And that led to last year starting to write Rise of the Lazy Game Master. And now today launching the Kickstarter to get that book over the finish line with art and editing and layout and production and all of that. So that's the short summary of all of that.
So of where you have been, ending with where we are. And I'm looking over at the Kickstarter, which is now, it's only been up for about 4 hours, and it is just ready to crest $100,000. So
yes.
Congratulations on that. There will be a link in our show notes, but if you go to Kickstarter and type in Rise of the Lazy Dungeon Master, Rise, I'm going to do that 100 times.
No, you think you've done it 100 times. I do it constantly. I've been talking about another book for 8 years. Yeah.
So here we go. Rise of the Lazy Game Master.
Yeah.
So let's talk for a bit about what this book is. But sure. I'm going to start with a question that I'm sure you get a lot, and it's one that I've wrestled with too, which is, what does lazy mean to you? Because lazy is a word that has a connotation of negativity.
Okay.
Of you're not doing what you're supposed to do. So when if somebody is just looking at the shelf and they say lazy, that's not good. I don't want to be a lazy. So what does lazy mean?
I'll share a funny anecdote though. On Reddit, there was like the people that were praising the book about. They were like, one person was like, "I need a book that helps me with this," and then they said, "Oh, you should try this book." And somebody else was like, "I like the book and his advice, but I hate that he calls it lazy, and I think that was a really bad marketing choice." And I'm like, "Well, I have good news. I have news for you. It actually turned out to work out pretty well. Like I don't think if I had changed it to the efficient game master that it would be that much better. But that's really what we're talking about, right? Is efficiency and applying the right energy to the right parts of a, when we talk about lazy in general, it's that applying the right amount of energy at the right time and not any more than you were typically expending. And in the world of game mastering, it's really about prepping what you need to run an awesome game and nothing else. Right. And thinking really hard about the element. And this is not a general, there's no general answer to this. It is a very specific answer for specific GMs and the situations that they're in, of what do you really need that's going to make your game fun for you and your players when you're sitting down around a table and playing. Mm-hmm. And one of the kind of initial catalysts of this was back before I wrote The Lazy Dungeon Master, and it was on a podcast where I was on with Jeff Greiner on the Tome Show, I think in 4th edition days. And I did a little segment on the show that was like, you should only, the most important game you have is the next one you're going to run, right? There is no other important game. The game 2 out, that's not as important as the one you're about to run. And the games that you've already run. They're no longer important, right? Like you've got one game you need to worry about, and it's the one you've got on Wednesday at 7 or whatever, right? For me, it's Wednesday at 7, right? So that's the thing to worry about. And then you sit and look, okay, well, if I've got that game that I'm running on Wednesday at 7, what are the things I need in order to run that game on Wednesday at 7, right? And it's only 3 hours long. What do I need for that? And we were talking about the GMs and thinking too big with their worlds, or new writers to the RPG industry, and immediately saying, hey, great, I have a 750-page epic campaign setting I want to write. And you're like, how about a 2-pager, right? How about a 2-page thing? And the same is true with GMs, right? We now have this wonderful creative output that some people are actually going to care about, right? Which is a rare thing in this world these days.
Right.
But we have 6 people who are actually interested in this creative world we build. And they're like, oh, I want to give it all, right? I want to do the whole thing. And you're like, but they only care so much, right? Yeah. And they only, so what are the things that you really need that's going to matter to them? And I remember my friend, and do you know Enrique Bertrand?
Oh, sure.
Okay, yeah, I can't remember if he was a friend of yours or not, but a friend to all of us. And he was on a podcast with me one time, and he says, like, no one cares about your 40,000 year history or the 27 gods or whatever is happening up on that mountain with the altar. They care about what's happening in town right now. What's happening here right now? What can they do? Where are they going? They care about that stuff. They don't care about that. And that also really was a catalyst for me for this idea of like narrowing down on the things that you really need to do. So then that's kind of the core concept of the lazy part of lazy game mastering, is focusing down on the things you really need in order to run a fun game for you and your friends, and the strength and difficulty of cutting out the stuff you don't.
I'm going to loop back about that later. I think I have a question. Okay, I'm going to ask it now, and we can defer on this question to later if you want.
Yeah.
Which is, where's the discrepancy in your experience between the stuff that you need for Wednesday night at 7 versus the stuff that you as the game master and the creative person want to make?
Yeah. That's a good question. I don't know. And I think it's different for different people. I think, but I do think there is that sort of the creative writer part of, I want to build this whole thing. And sometimes the sources that inspire us are steering us the wrong way sometimes, where, and I see this a lot of times, I'm sure you see it too, where like sometimes there are movies that we love, right? But the plot of that movie is a terrible adventure.
Right.
Because the plot only works because the character is going to act a certain way, and our players don't act that way.
No.
There are other movies that are wonderful. So I'll give you a good example. Knives Out, right? Or any of those. Terrible plot for an adventure.
Right.
Because the whole story is already known to the characters that are in it, right? Like, but Seven Samurai, the Kurosawa movie, great movie, because it's a situation. It's like, there are 7 people defending a village from bandits, right? That's a good, there's a good D&D adventure, right?
Right.
So I think in the same way that, the kind of stuff that GMs are inspired by can sometimes lead them towards an approach of wanting to do things that aren't the high impact stuff. And I think, and we've all heard it forever. Oh, I built this incredible adventure with all this intricate details, and the characters decided to go into the woods, and I didn't have anything for the woods, and I had to make things up from the book, but the players had a good time anyway, right? Like that's a very, very common experience.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's just one thing, but I think part of it comes down to that, the trying to constrain the creative explosion that we have as GMs is really difficult, right? And we want to build these vast worlds, and we deep down hope that our players are going to care, and the reality is they probably don't. Not always. It's I'm being extreme, but not always.
Sure. Well, there's so many audiences, so many different kinds of players.
Yeah, sure. And some players love all that lore. And I think lore is important. I'm not saying like you shouldn't have details of your game, but maybe have the details that you think are going to matter to the characters is the important part.
Yeah. Okay, so why this book and why right now?
Yeah. So why this book is because there are now, according to if you look at Wizards descriptions of it, but I don't think it's far off. There are 4 times more people playing RPGs now than there was like 8 years ago, right? And that's wild when you think that 3 out of 4 people have only been playing since 5th edition D&D has been out.
Yeah.
Also, that means there's 4 times more people than when I wrote the original Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master. And I've gotten a lot of feedback on it. And I think people still need that kind of help. And the good news is Return has been, from the feedback that I've gotten and from what I've heard and from the recommendations people are making to other people about it, has helped them with a lot of that. But there's also a lot more to say, right? The book is, I'm very proud of Return, and it is still a valuable book and will continue to be a valuable book even after Rise of the Lazy Game Master comes out. Rise is not a rewrite of the stuff that is in Return. They are two different lenses on the same problem, both of which work well together. But when it comes to the most impactful part of Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master was this idea of having 8 steps for game prep.
Right.
And the key there was, as you and I both know, a lot of the mainstream Game Master books are not offering a really clear process for how you prep and run a game. And the reason why is they have a big audience, and that audience may be doing it a lot of different ways. So they don't feel confident to say, here's one way. There's a few books that do, like Mothership. The Mothership is known to have like a really good GM instructions on here's what you do to build and run a game, but it works specifically for Mothership.
Right.
Yeah. And the same is true for like Dungeon World, right? Dungeon World has, and Apocalypse World has very clear, like, this is what you do during your session 1. This is what you do during session 2, and so on. But a lot of other big games don't really have and still don't, right? Like new games that just came out don't have really solid instructions and like, here's how you prep a game. Like, step 1, do this. And so I said, well, hey, here's steps, but they're also flexible. They are also, you can eliminate ones that you don't need. You can reshape them to fit you and your style. You can add things that you know you need. There's a philosophy and then also a framework, and the framework is a flexible framework that people can use. And I would not claim like these 8 steps are the absolute 8 steps for game prep, period. And there's nothing better. They are the best I can provide.
Right.
But I would not claim that they are the only way. However, I think people resonate with them because it is a usable way. And sometimes people just need a life raft out in the giant sea of the unknown of game prep, right? They need something to, thank God somebody is saying, write down a piece of paper and write down the names of your characters and think about them, and then think about the first scene you're going to run, and then have their scenes and so on. But this book in particular, because I've had all these other experiences, because I've run it now like 1,000 times, I've done this process for game prep, and I've gotten tons of experience from lots and lots, thousands of people have given me feedback on how these processes have worked and where the trouble bits have been, and we now have a bunch of new games, and we have a bunch of new styles, and like the biggest game has a new version of the game too. There's more to say about each of these, and so the good news is the 8 steps aren't changing. Right. The 8 steps are still the same 8 steps. I didn't have to have a 9th step, nor did I say, well, this step is useless, you can throw it out. The 8 steps are still there. But each of them, it's like, here are different ways that you can use these 8 steps based on your comfort as a GM, the system you're running, where you are in your campaign, lots of other variables that are determining where to use those 8 steps. And this book, where Return focused on, how to prep your game, how to run your game, and how to think about your game at kind of a high level. This one is the nitty gritty of here's the 8 steps. Here's how you use them here. Here's how you consider them when you're doing campaign planning. Here's the 10 different common adventure types and how those steps can be customized around those adventure types. And then here's like a general toolkit of experiences. Like Return has a toolkit of things, and it's got about 7 big tips in it. This one has 60. Right. Wow. So we have a whole lot of like, hey, these are tricks that now have come from other game systems. They've come from other GMs. They come from lots of places. Here they all are, little encapsulated tools that you can say, I like that idea and I'm going to grab it and put in my game.
Do those 8 steps, obviously they change when you apply them to a different game.
Yeah.
But do they change dramatically, or does it seem to jive all the way through the whole rainbow of different game systems that are out there?
Yeah, I wouldn't say dramatically. Okay. They can, sometimes it's slight, and sometimes it's even significant might be too strong a term, but the steps can generally still work. I wouldn't say it's 100%, right? There are definitely games where I found like, Blades in the Dark, for example, was a game where I had trouble applying the 8 steps to Blades in the Dark because the nature of the game changes so much while you're playing it. Right. That it's really hard to like outline the specifics that the 8 steps offer. Most of the time, though, they hold up. And I think one of the reasons why they hold up well is they're focused on real in-world things rather than kind of mechanics or game structures. So, you have your scenes, you have your secrets and clues, you have monsters, you have NPCs, you have rewards, you have locations. These are physical things, right? There's,
Right.
Scenes take place at places, right? In almost every game that you're playing. There's almost always a space. You're not ever in a game where it's just this fuzzy realm of nothingness. There's like, no, you're somewhere. So what is that somewhere like? And what matters when you're thinking about what that somewhere is like? You're usually interacting with entities. Those are like NPCs. You almost always have those. Sometimes you have NPCs that are friendly. Sometimes you have them that are not. And so you can separate between NPCs and monsters. And an example of where things kind of shifted is the only step where the name shifted was originally I had a like preparing magic item rewards. And now it's just preparing rewards. Okay. And the reason why is that there are definitely games where you don't get physical items to increase any benefit. Sometimes it's just character growth. Sometimes it's information that you received. There's lots of different sort of reward systems that different games offer. You still want to pay attention to those rewards, but they might not be a physical thing as much as I had considered it when I wrote Return the first time. But that's the only one where the name changed at all. And it was literally just saying, hey, this is, the theme of that step still stayed the same. So I wouldn't say it's 100% universal for every RPG, but I have played now dozens of different RPGs using the 8 steps. And I still find them to work really well in all of them. I've used them from Shadow Dark to Tales of the Valiant to Daggerheart to, lots of, Dragonbane, tons of different systems that I've played. Using the 8 steps, and for me, it's like it's just easy to drop in and start using them, and the games that I run continue to play out regardless of the system.
Okay. Has there ever been a tendency, because you were using the steps, to have a game that should feel very different from, say, D&D, start to feel like D&D because you are putting these steps around them?
So I'm sure it's happened, but I don't think so. I think I'll give you a good example. I think the flow of I just finished up a Daggerheart campaign, about a 20 session, maybe not 20 sessions, 13 or so sessions Daggerheart campaign. And Daggerheart has a different approach for world building in that you're intended to have a lot of sort of open-ended questions.
Right.
That let the players kind of build the world out while you're playing. That's kind of that's not an uncommon thing these days. We're seeing more and more of that style of play of the players are they're the aura of their creation in the game is now outside of the bounds of their character. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I didn't do it particularly well, but I saw the benefit of it. And actually in the book I talk about it, where step 1 of the 8 steps is review the characters, right? The characters are the most important actors in the game. They're the thing that your players care about the most. So the first thing you should do is at least know who they are, right? What's their name? Some information about them. And an area where the book, where Rise is different than Return is it really says like, hey, there's lots of different ways to review the characters and lots of things to review. When you're sitting down, consider what you want to be reviewing about the characters. Are you focused on like what's their connection to the world? Are you focused on like what their role is in combat? Are you focused on what rewards they have or don't have that you want to be thinking about? Are you thinking about their relationship with other characters? Like there's lots of things that you need to consider. And you don't need to consider all of them every time, but you can ask yourself, what do I need to put in here? And for Daggerheart, the answer is instead of having a statement, one that I've defaulted to a lot now is what would this character know about what's happening in this world, right? It's an easy way for me to kind of like, if my goal is to draw the character into the world, I want to have some kind of sinew that connects the character to the world and say, that this NPC has had a reputation of being, untrustworthy, right? And because you are a rogue, the rogues, and this other rogue, you immediately tell they're a scam artist, right? So you can write that into something the character could know. In Daggerheart, and something that you can do instead of making that a statement, you make it a question. And you could say like, what was your relationship with this other roguelike character? And you can write that in the character step. And then when it comes up during the game, you can ask that question to the player and then they can prompt on it. And then they're getting the same kind of world building. So I think most of the time, the steps are pretty easy to manipulate to fit the style of game that you're playing. I haven't used them with games like Call of Cthulhu, where you have like a heavy mystery sort of focus.
Right.
But knowing how Call of Cthulhu plays out, having played in them before, you can say like, well, I'm going to shift away from monsters, right? And focus more on secrets and clues.
Right.
And make sure maybe I have even more than 10 because there's such a focus on secrets and clues. I want to have a lot of those so that the characters can be investigating and learning lots of little different pieces of information as they're exploring this thing. So that's one where the flexibility of the 8 steps helps ensure that it fits the kind of game that you're playing. Yeah. But the other reality is a lot of times the games we are playing are kind of, fantasy adventure games, right? Where you go down into dungeons. So there's still that bigger focus on like, hey, adventures going on adventures is the general theme we're most going to hit. So let's focus more on that than games that are kind of outside the periphery where they have very different styles. Like this isn't going to work if you're playing Fiasco. Right. Certainly.
Yeah. That's why I was going to ask, are there any games outside of the ones that are not tabletop role-playing games as we understand them, that you're like, this doesn't even, my rules sort of don't make sense here? I'm trying to imagine a game that would be like that, because you talk about Shadow Dark, it's like, understand the characters. The character that's going to be dead in
but I ran it with Shadow Dark. I mean, I ran a year-long Shadow Dark campaign with the 8 steps. I actually did all my prep online so people could see me prepping for a Shadow Dark game online. And it got Kelsey Dion's attention, right, who had seen some of it and it was admired the fact that the 8 steps worked well with a game like it. So you're gonna focus on different things. Right. And a lot of times there's definitely times where you look and you're like, I'm not going to bother with that step at all. So, and if you have characters where like the player, like if you're running a single session game and people are bringing their own characters, you don't even know who they are. Guess what? You don't have to do a review the character step, right? You can go straight to the strong start. And sometimes you might you just might not spend nearly as much time on them because they die. But it's also, I tell you, for Shadow Dark, it was a lot of fun having some thought about those characters and then still having them, depart in horrifying ways. I think I'm wearing a shirt right now. It's a shirt made by one of my players that has all of the deaths of the Shadow Dark characters on the back of the shirt, like concert appearances.
Amazing. With
how they died. Yeah. And it's like 14 or 15 different deaths of their characters in there. But I mean, I'm a lazy dude. And if the steps had not worked for me for that game, I would not have used them. To run it, and I ended up using them. And the interesting thing for me is it really meant that like prepping for Shadow Dark wasn't any harder than prepping for 5e, and vice versa. And you would think like Shadow Dark is such a lighter weight game compared to like a thicker 5e game. But it turns out that because I'm so kind of refined around the 8 steps, prepping them is always kind of the same process, and it's always pretty easy.
So we talk about all this prep and getting ready and focusing on the cool things. How important is randomness to you, both in preparing adventures or campaigns and then seeing the story unfold at the table? Because D&D is a game with tables everywhere, right? And the Dungeon Master's Guide throughout the editions has been either a plethora or a dearth of these random tables. So how does that speak to you in terms of just as a game master, but also as somebody who does focus on prep in the way that you do? Yeah.
I love them. I love random tables. I love randomness as a feature. That's definitely one where game systems have different feelings about it than others. If you play a game like Daggerheart, I really feel like the design of Daggerheart expects that when you're going to have like a combat encounter, that you're going to spend time during prep to build out that character, that combat encounter, choosing the mix of monsters that you're going to have. It's usually a lot of monsters. The way the encounter building works in Daggerheart, you usually have more, significantly more monsters than characters, and you're going to have a mix. And so that had a very 4th edition feeling for encounter building in Daggerheart. You go to a game like Dolmenwood, and Dolmenwood does not expect that you have prepped any encounters. And when you go in, you're rolling randomly, not just for what kind of monster it might be, but how many of them there are, what their attitude is, what kind of behaviors they're up to, how close or far, how aware are they. And so you really don't know what that situation is going to be till you make that volley of rolls and determine that. Now, in if you're using something like the 8 steps for that, you might say, well, I'm not going to worry on prepping monsters, right? Because they're going to be random anyway. So I'm going to worry about it then. You might also say, well, I'm going to pre-roll some things so that I don't have to go through that entire process at the table. I can instead have a handful of ones that I'm going to use on the side. Or you're like, well, we ended right before a big fight, and I know who is in that, so I'm going to go ahead and spend the time to kind of put that there. I use randomness in a bunch of ways when I'm prepping. I will use it I use it a lot for treasure generation. Like, I'm not going to come up with a treasure parcel on my own. I almost always have a random generator that builds parcels, and then I will often tune it by saying, here's a good item that one character might really like. I will drop that in there too. I really love randomness for monuments, like a structure that's kind of the cornerstone of a scene. This is something that I'm really big on that I don't see a lot, which is when you have a scene in your game and you have a group of people that are going to a place. That place, I like to have a central feature of that place, like a set of a play. Right, like what's the main focal point of this location, so that is it a weird fountain with strange gargoyles on top, or is it a half ruined statue of a lord that everybody forgot about where the head's been broken off? What are these things? Something you see in movies all the time. You watch the Lord of the Rings movies, and every time they have a scene, they have like a monument, and they don't describe it, but you're like, well, this means something. Aragorn is fighting off a horde of orcs standing on a half ruined tower with a bunch of eagles on the outside. I bet there's a story about that place that we haven't heard. I'm sure somebody's gonna know it.
Yeah.
So I like using random tables to determine things like that. Like, what are these monuments like? Another thing that I highly recommend is that if you're in whatever setting you're in, whether it's a homebrew setting or whether it's a published setting, having a random list of the factions of that setting, whether that's gods or historical figures or current faction groups, and having that list handy so that whenever you drop in either like a quest or an NPC or a monument or an item, you can roll on that faction list and be, oh, that is like a monument of Grumsh, right? Like this, and that tells you what that looks like. And then now you can tie it to secrets and clues so that, when a player goes there and they can learn a little bit of something about Grumsh, if they didn't know it before, or then ask, why is there a Grumsh monument here? Do we need to be worried about, the orcs coming down on us?
Right.
I really like that part. And I think having that list of custom factions for your campaign so that you as a GM can roll on it regularly to flavor everything else. Like, it's really neat when you get a +1 sword. It's really cool. And like, that was a sword made by the elves, right? And they made that 1,000 years ago. And now it has a texture of history that kind of wraps around the common elements to our games that might be boring if we didn't have that texture of history. Yeah. One thing you'll find in Rise is it's packed with random tables. It is, way more so than Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master had. Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master came out with another book called The Lazy DM's Workbook that had a lot of random tables in it for lots of different things. And this one brings in lots of other random tables from other places, both in the book itself, like, hey, here's, if you've got your strong start, right, which is step 2, here are 20 strong starts for a game that has not happened yet. Like, that's the first time you're playing. And then here's some for games that you might be in the middle of, right? Here's examples of 20 strong starts that, for things that are occurring while you're in the middle of a session. So all throughout the book, I have these tables that are both intended to be inspirational. Hey, these are examples of what I'm talking about, right? When we talk about strong starts, here are 20 examples of strong starts. But also you could roll on it if you're stuck, right? Nice. You can actually grab a die and roll it and see what you get there. And I think and then the third is, like, you can also make your own list that's similar to this. The whole kind of focus on randomness between bigger games, I'm going to say heavier games like your D&D 5e's, and then more of what referred to, I call folk heroic games. Other people call them old school games of the ways that D&D used to be. That's a really interesting question that's going around in the community already, and you read articles where they're like, you should only ever do random stuff. You should never pre-plan it, right? And then there's other games where it's like, it's very clear we don't even offer random tables for it. Right. So I think that it's an interesting conversation, and I'm trying to capture the benefits of both in this book in a way that we didn't talk about 8 years ago when I wrote about it originally.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, we could go on for forever. This is super
just for the note,
stuff.
I note in your show notes here, it says more. So yes. I'm
Yeah,
ready.
you're just ready for more. Unfortunately, the clock on the wall
Mm.
says we are at time, but I want to reiterate here that it was great to have you on,
Oh,
and
thank you so much for having me on. I really
the,
appreciate
the,
it.
the Kickstarter is going on right now. I'm checking. Definitely just topped $100,000.
Oh,
You
really?
can go, yeah, you can go to Kickstarter and you can
Yay.
type in Rise of the Lazy Game Master. We will have a link in our show notes as well. Thank you so much, Mike.
Thank you. Really
I'm
appreciate
I, I'm
having
going
me
to
on.
give you time here, but I want to also say thank you to all of our listeners and thank you to our patrons who keep the lights on here for us at Mastering Dungeons. You can go to patreon.com/mastering D&D to become a patron. Thank you to all of our patrons, including Master of Dungeon supporters, our Master of Realm supporters get a shout out in our show notes. And normally the Masters of the Multiverse get their names mangled by me in real time, but we are running short on time, so I'm just going to tip my hat and say thank you. Mike, where can people find your work when it's not on Kickstarter? Where else can they follow your stuff?
Slyflourish.com.
Easy, easy and to the point. You can follow me everywhere on socials at Shawn Merwin and follow the show at Mastering D&D. You can also go to youtube.com/ at Mastering Dungeons to see our stuff there. So, Mike, good luck with the rest of this
Thank you
Kickstarter for the
so
next
much.
31 days
Yeah, I know.
and keep yeah, it's just getting started here.
I know.
And thanks for all the great work that you do for the gaming community.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me on. Thank you
All
for what
right.
you do for the community as well. I really appreciate
My
it.
pleasure.
Love
And
your
we'll
work.
catch everybody next time.